Hi everybody, this is Dr. Stringer again. We are on to Module 4 already, and Chapter 3 in your textbook. I'm sure that you are all enjoying this class. I know that it is your funnest class to take, and so I'm going to talk to you all about research ethics today. I'm sure you're all thrilled to hear about that, and even more thrilled to read about it. But I have to say, at least the Stanford Prison Experiment video is pretty interesting, and students in the past have tended to enjoy that, and some of you might have even watched this video in your corrections classes and stuff like that. So, sometimes you just have to figure out some way to embrace the things that you might not be enjoying so much in order to get through it, and find something about it that you enjoy. I remember being that way when I was in undergrad and I was taking law classes and stuff, and we had to read all of these Supreme Court cases all the time, and they were quite boring. But anyway, getting back to the topic of ethics in criminal justice, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. Shouldn't take too long since ethics are pretty straightforward. You just shouldn't do unethical things, right? These typically are associated with morality and things like that. It's interesting that before the Stanford Prison Experiment, there actually wasn't what we have now, which are called IRBs, which are Institutional Review Board is what IRB stands for, and they're supposed to be reviewing all of the research that we do to make sure that we're not putting kids in fake prisons and things like that, and subjecting them to psychological problems and things, because it's not quite ethical, right? And so one of the key parts of this is that there's supposed to be no harm done to participants. And so if you look at like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, where they gave people syphilis in order to test whether or not they could cure it or not, that might have harmed those people, right? Especially with the Stanford Prison Experiment and other things like that. And so one of the key issues is we don't want to harm people. And this has led to a lot of restrictions on new experiments being done nowadays, because it would harm people, especially when it comes to criminology and criminal justice issues. We can't conduct prison rape experiments and things like that to see if we dress a person this way, if they'll get more likely to get raped by the inmates than others, or something like that, for example. Because that would obviously cause harm to people. One of the other key parts is voluntary participation. You can't force people to, participate in your study. You can't force them to take your survey. You can't force them to participate in your experiment. You can't force them to do anything, pretty much. You can give them incentives and say, well, if you do this, I'll give you $20 or something like that, but you can't force them. You're also supposed to maintain what is known as anonymity or confidentiality. There is a difference between the two. Anonymity means that you just don't know who the person is that you're talking to. And so that's actually preferred. Confidentiality is when you know who the person is, but you're going to keep what they tell you confidential. And typically, researchers try to go with anonymity when they can. Mainly because even if you tell someone you're going to keep something confidential and they disclose to you that they've murdered 10 people or something like that, there's nothing that prevents the courts or the police or the prosecution from issuing a subpoena for you to come to court and testify about what this person has told you. And this creates an ethical dilemma for many researchers, but in the end of the day, our research ethics and the law are two completely different things. And so if we tell people that we're going to keep things confidential, then we intend to, but that doesn't prevent the judge and the courts and legal system from making you disclose this information. So that's why we tend to prefer anonymity. If you tell me that you killed 10 people and I have no idea who you are, then there's not really much I can do about it, right? And I'm just using that as an example, of course. No one's ever told me that they've killed anybody. I do teach a class on drugs, and so that's rather interesting to hear these stories sometimes, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so deceiving subjects. This is generally considered to be unethical, and they generally say don't do that, don't go undercover, and try to deceive people. And people do this. You probably have seen, what was it, MSNBC, where they used to try to catch child abusers and stuff like that all the time, or studying crack houses, as NCRD did. This is a really interesting way to collect data, to go kind of undercover, and it would be fascinating, but apparently it's unethical, so we're not supposed to do that. And if you're just pretending to be a drug addict, then, you're not really deceiving them that much, I would think. But then again, they're going to want you to do drugs, and so that might be a bit of a hairy subject for most. Analysis and reportings. You need to report your findings, and you have an ethical obligation to the scientific community to do that, as well as any negative findings and stuff that maybe you didn't really want to find, but you did. You're not supposed to change things around to make them the way you want. It's unethical, right? Legal liability, failing to report observed criminal activity to police. This can lead you to some issues. Subpoenas, like I said, violate confidentiality sometimes, and then there's legal immunity that they can give you under U.S. Code 42, Section 22.28a, things like that. Failing to report observed criminal activity to the police is an interesting one, because on the one hand, if someone tells you they're a serial killer, then ethically you should tell the police that, there's a serial killer, right? But then on the other hand, you have kind of an ethical obligation to, the confidentiality of this person. And I'm sure most of you would say, well, he's a serial killer, so we don't care. It's in the interest of public safety to get the serial killer caught. But think about this as it goes to drug use or something like that. If you see someone smoking a joint or something, do you think that you should have to report that? That's an interesting ethical dilemma that you all can talk about in your ethics course. And you guys have a whole required course on ethics, which is another reason I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Special problems, becoming aware of staff misbehavior. This can be an issue. Research can cause crime or influences locations or targets. Crime can be displaced. You can read your textbook and learn about this kind of stuff. But when you find out about staff misbehavior, what are you supposed to do about that? Are you supposed to keep it confidential, or are you supposed to report it? Well, that gets into another one of these ethical dilemmas. Mandatory reporting for federal child abuse prevention and treatment in 1974, so that's mandatory. And even as a state employee here in Georgia, it's not a federal act, but if someone comes and discloses to me something about being sexually assaulted or something like that, as a state employee, I have to report that too. So these are interesting things to think about if you're doing research in these areas. So promoting compliance with ethical principles. There's the National Research Act in 1974. The Belmont Report is probably more well-known in 1979. It's a comprehensive set of ethical principles, that we're supposed to follow when doing human subjects research. And we actually do have to go through training every year, a refresher for human subjects research, to make sure that everybody remembers what they're supposed to be doing. And then there's codes of professional ethics. I know we have one for the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, American Society of Criminology, American Bar Association, American Psychological Association. Each professional organization usually has their own. I've already talked about institutional review boards, so I won't bore you too much with all of that. But essentially, you submit a research proposal to them, and you talk about the safeguards that you're going to have to protect the confidentiality, welfare, safety, and all of that stuff of not only the subjects, but you want to protect the safety of the researchers too. You can't submit a proposal that probably get approved if you want to go and send a bunch of graduate students to South Atlanta to study crime on Saturday nights at from midnight to 4 a.m. That might be jeopardizing their safety, so that's another ethical issue. Informed consent in special populations, so if you're dealing with juveniles and things like that, those are special populations that you want to make sure that you get consent from their parents to interview them and for them to participate. Research rights, many social research designs are regarded as exempt. So I use secondary data a lot, which is data that's been collected by somebody else, and I can just download it and analyze it. And so then I'm considered exempt because I'm not having any human subjects interaction. So that means you don't have to go to the full IRB review. So there's some other examples of different things that people have done. Humphreys was famous for his kind of parks and study of homosexual people, and he served as this watch queen, which was the person that was supposed to go and watch out while the homosexuals were having sex in the park bathrooms and stuff like that. But he actually then took it a step further and noted the license plate numbers of participants, tracked down the names and addresses through the police, and then sent them a survey about their homosexual behavior, which was considered to be unethical. The Stanford Prison Experiment is another good example, which you can all watch that video hopefully and see why that was probably a bit dehumanizing and possibly brutal to those that were the prisoners in that situation, and not so much to the guards at least. This was in the basement of the psychology building at Harvard or Stanford. Yeah, Stanford, of course, because Stanford Prison Experiment, duh. And so, you guys can read or watch that video and learn a little bit more about that. But a lot of them were having depression and anxiety issues. The guards became aggressive. The prisoners passive. They had given consent with signed contract. But it's really interesting how they kind of lost their sense of reality. They forgot that it was a fake prison, and it was prematurely terminated when one of Zimbardo's colleagues came in there and kind of saw what was going on and convinced him to put a stop to it. So that's all I had to talk about for research ethics. I think that's kind of the high points of it. And so you guys could read more in your textbook, all the finer points, and watch the Stanford Prison Experiment. Please don't forget to take your quiz and do your discussion boards as well. And I'll talk to you next time.